So today we're just going to kind of like do one last time, and Daniel, and we're going to kind of cover what the book is about. And I've kind of got it broken up into two parts. One of them is just a little outline I prepared that kind of puts the book of Daniel. Well, okay, so we're going to do kind of like a 30,000-foot view and then a 10,000 foot view. So how does the book of Daniel kind of fit in thematically with the entire Bible? I can't cover all of that, but it's just there's a big theme in the Bible where that Daniel addresses, and then we'll look at that outline and that the Bible Project did, and sort of kind of we'll take a second look at the way that it's outlined and the key messages that are within the book. I found this in the catacombs, so kind of like goes along with our theme lately, where you have like classical or old Christian art of these events. But this is, of course, Daniel in the lion's den.
Really make it in the den?
Who knows? Probably they're probably like I shouldn't say probably, but it's.
Okay.
I think it's probable that it's like those.
Which one?
This is in Rome, yeah. So there's some catacomb art that I think is really cool. One with Jonah being spit out by the sea monster, anyway, and that was like on people's tombs. I don't know why their hands are spread. There's a whole bunch of art with people with their hands spread. I don't know if it's like he's kind of like as worshiping. Yeah, it's probably worship. I wondered if it was kind of like also, like that he's a martyr and being crucified or something, or identifying with the crucifixion of Jesus. I don't know. I don't really think about this painting. I was just kind of cruising around looking for stuff. So we'll start with a tale of two cities. By the time you get to the end of the Bible, and actually throughout the Bible, you find out that there is two kind of cities within the Bible that are the archetypes of two very different things. And that is Jerusalem and Babylon. Jerusalem is one archetype. And I use the word archetype as if I'm just talking about, like literature or something like that. But that's kind of like the best description that I have. It's that there's something more to Jerusalem than just Jerusalem. There's something more to Babylon than just Babylon. Babylon is like what happened, and there's something that both of those cities represent that's much bigger than either geographical location, put it that way. So to kind of look at the archetypes, Babylon, if you were going to make a summary statement, I like what Bill Randall said. He said, Babylon is the organization of man against or without God. So it's man making civilization his own thing, right? And then Jerusalem is the city of God, or Mount Zion, where God dwells with man. So that's the civilization where man is working in harmony with God. God is working with humans, and that is the civilization that results. So, by the time you get to the end of the Bible, you have this idea of the New Jerusalem, and it is where God is dwelling with man, Babylon, it goes all the way back to the exile in Egypt. The whole idea of exile goes all the way back to Eden. So it starts on the first few pages of the Bible, where if you think about it, Eden is the beginning of civilization. So we think garden, and that there's kind of like, you get an idea that there's supposed to be agriculture happening there because man is supposed to work the garden and everything. And we think of gardens, or maybe not gardens, but we think of agriculture happening outside of the city, as in a rural environment. But in the ancient world, it happened within the city walls. That's part of your civilization. That's part of your city, and you have to protect it. So Eden is the beginning of civilization with man ruling and ordering with God. God is walking in the garden. God is with man, right?
Yeah.
Exile, of course, because of sin, this happens because man chose his own way. And on the day that he did this, he died. And you think, well, he didn't die physically, but the words there are die, you'll die. Because what you find out is that exile is death, and death is the ultimate exile. So the day that they disobeyed God, they died because they were sent away from the presence of God. We call it spiritual death. But the resurrection that we're promised is not just a physical resurrection, but we're also waiting for in a sense, a reunion with God, which already happens. So the day that you become the Lord's, then you are brought back to life, where He dwells in you, and you're back together. But the ultimate expression of that is, if working backwards, is again to have a new life physically, right? The bodily resurrection, in other words. So they're exiled. So you already have this theme of exile from the very first pages of the Bible, and they're exiled to the east. This is going to be you're going to see that Jerusalem sort of represents where Eden was. In other words, Jerusalem, in a sense, is Eden. So you have this whole movement towards the east. They're exiled eastwards out of the garden, and then you kind of have a picture that they're just outside of the garden. But then when Cain and Abel bring their offerings, they're bringing it like they're on the footsteps of Eden, like on the doorsteps of Eden. One's accepted and one's not. But Cain, he becomes the first murderer. So, things are going downhill really quickly, and he's exiled even further east. Okay. Now here you get this idea of like a city or civilization built by somebody who's cast outside of the presence of God, even further than Adam and Eve is, because he's cursed to be a restless wanderer on the earth. But the first thing he does is build a city. So you're supposed to be thinking, wait a minute, he's building a city. What's it mean by he's going to be a restless wanderer? Yeah, he's further from Eden, but he's building a city, and the city's called Nod. Nod means wandering. So the city itself is called wandering. So the first city mentioned in scripture means wandering or exile or unrest. So you're already seeing that the civilization that man makes is not going to be a good thing. He's in exile. So it's a pre-picture of Babylon, what Babylon is going to be the ultimate archetype of is already happening here. It's civilization wandering away from the presence of God. So Bavel in Hebrew means confusion. It's the same word for Babylon. There's no separate word for Babel or Babylon, which we put in our Bible, because when we get to the Tower of Babel, that story, we want to emphasize the confusion that happened there. Okay, but there's no change of name there in Hebrew. It's all Bavel, right? So the story leading to Bavel is that after the flood, Noah's got 3 sons, but his sketchy son, Ham, he fathers Canaan, and Noah curses Canaan. He doesn't curse Ham directly, but he curses Canaan. And one of Canaan's offspring is Nimrod. I think it's his grandson or great-grandson. Nimrod, yeah, okay. Like you call somebody a Nimrod, right? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, that came, okay.
I forgot about that.
That came from a Bugs Bunny cartoon, because Elmer Fudd was hunting and rabbit, right? I'm hunting rabbit, right? And then well, you wasky rabbit. And then what happens is that Bugs Bunny makes fun of him because Nimrod was a mighty hunter. So he's making fun of Elmer being the mighty. Right. Yeah. People are they don't know the story, or that started assuming he's calling him like that's a creative name to call somebody like an idiot Nimrod. But what he's saying really in that original cartoon is like, okay, Nimrod, like how mighty warrior. So that's how that came about. Yeah. So this guy's named Nimrod, and he is the founder of Babylon. He's the one who starts that city. And Nimrod founds another city called Nineveh, which that's where Jonah went. Remember the city of Nineveh? That was the capital of Assyria. So you've got two cities that are the capital cities of Israel's exile, right? Yes, Assyria was like where the north was carried off into exile to. Babylon's where the south was carried off to. And so Nimrod planted both of those cities. And Canaan also fathered Mizraim, who became Egypt. So there's three places in the world already that Canaan fathers. Three civilizations that are sort of like the lands of Israel's exile and wandering and stuff. So as people moved eastwards, some translations have come from the east, but I believe it's eastwards. They built a ziggurat in Babylon, which is the Tower of Babel. A ziggurat is basically, the idea was that you would build this tower and you would do it to control the god. In other words, we're going to get this god to do what we want to. So we're going to build a ziggurat. We're going to reach up to the heavens, make a name for ourselves by getting these gods to do whatever we want or whatever. So it was more of like so that was what they were doing, that in the face of God. We're going to try to get God to do what we want, and we're going to make a name for ourselves. And so God divides their civilizations and places them under the sons of God. So he puts them under basically angelic beings who would end up instead of leading them to God, they led them to themselves and became the demons that were the gods of the nations. So this all happens like because of Babylon and Babel. But what the next story is in the Bible is God establishing his own nation. Okay, so he's already divided the nations from Babylon, but now he's going to start his own nation. So he calls Abraham out of Babylon. Ur of the Chaldees is in Babylon. So he's saying, come out of Babylon, and I'm going to build a nation out of you. They would be his people, and he would be their God. That's the idea. You got all those other nations I spread out, but now I'm going to build a nation from you, Abraham, but you got to come out of Babylon, and you got to go to the promised land. He's got to go back westwards. Okay, so it's already giving you the idea that he's going back to Eden in a sense, right? So he would lead Abraham back west and Abraham would encounter the priest of the Most High God, Melchizedek, who was the priest and king of Salem, where you get the word shalom from, or peace. So this is proto-Jerusalem. This is early Jerusalem. It's the city of peace. And the same Salem that John the Baptist.
Well, my last one is
Salim. Okay. It's related. I've never heard. Yeah, it just means peace. Salim. Well, we have a Salem, Oregon, but Peace, Oregon, but yeah, Salem cigarettes. No, so so if you think about where Abraham meets Melchizedek, Melchizedek becomes a big deal. It's also the same sort of like square mile that Abraham comes back and to offer Isaac as an offering on the mountain there. Yeah. So it's all the same. It's all the same kind of hilltop, you know, and where Jesus is going to be crucified, where the temple is going to stand. So when David comes to settles in Israel and becomes king, he moves his headquarters and the tabernacle to the town where he knows Melchizedek lived. Right. So Jerusalem becomes sort of like this, is becoming a big deal. It's the city of Shalom, and it would be the promise of the city with foundations. I'm reading from Hebrews here, with foundations whose architect and builder is God's. So it's not going to be just a piece of real estate. Jerusalem's going to represent the civilization that God would build. The city with foundations whose architect and builder is God. This is something that Hebrews gets into and says, Abraham wasn't just looking for a piece of real estate. Abraham was looking for something eternal. And that's why, in that sense, he had set his faith on what God would do and what God would bring. So exile. So what happens? Okay, if Jerusalem, you've got the people of God living in Jerusalem, but what happens if the people in Jerusalem and the promised land are unfaithful to God? So what if they're like Adam and Eve and they create a civilization without or against God? They become like Babylon, right? So what happens is they're exiled to the east and they end up in Babylon. You end up in Babylon, even though you're the people of God. If you start like building civilization and ruling things the way that man rules them, the Babylon way, you end up in Babylon again.
They kick them out and
God kicked them out. Basically, God said, "I'm using Nebuchadnezzar to run Jerusalem over, and I'm bringing you into exile for 70 years." So that's it's an exile from Eden again. You know, kind of like when they came back from exile and started coming back, they were like, you know what, we're still in exile. During the Roman era, they were like, we're still in exile. And you know what? Come to think of it, humanity is under exile. We're not where we're supposed to be. And we're under exile because of what Adam and Eve did. Exile is, we're living in Babylon because Babylon is what we've created from Adam and Eve on. And what we're hoping for. Exodus it just means an exit because they were exiting Egypt. So it's not to be confused with exile. But exile, the idea of exile is something that, you know, they had like a period in their history where they were exiled from their homeland, but to them, right, and they said they knew that they deserved it, because God's like, why am I going to protect you if you're just going to act like Babylon? You're going into exile in Babylon. And so there's like a lot of reflection, and it's not just their story and their history. They're looking at their story and their history, and they're like, you know what? We're a microcosm of what's happened to the world since Adam and Eve. So Daniel becomes this story of true humanity in exile. The book of Daniel is a picture of maintaining an identity as the people of God. In other words, that we are still Israel. We are Jerusalem, while we're living in Babylon, the world system. So Daniel knows that unfaithfulness has caused the exile. So like when you read Daniel 9, he says, we've done this, O Lord, please have mercy on us. He's including himself in that whole mix, right? But Daniel and his friends, you know, even though that unfaithfulness has caused exile, they're not personally unfaithful. And so they remain faithful in exile with the hope that exile will end. And they know that God is in control, so that God brought them into exile, and that it's his judgment, but it's also God's control for return and redemption. So Daniel's vision looks to the future and the ultimate exile and redemption of humanity. And why the reason I said true humanity in exile is because for Daniel, it's not just if you become like the world and become like Babylon. In a sense, you become like beasts. We'll get into that in a second. So while he's in exile, that's kind of like this balance of loyalty and subversion. Daniel and his friends are very loyal in a sense to Babylon, but they're also very subversive to Babylon. So when the Babylonian invasion came, some Jews revolted. They said, "We're going to fight," even though the prophets had told them, "Look, you're going into exile, and God is going to do this." They still said, well, okay, they toppled over and busted down some of our buildings, but we will build back better, and we're going to make taller buildings and more, and it's going to be more glorious than before. That's what they were bragging. And God was saying, "No, you're not. You're going into exile." Sounds kind of familiar, right? So while others compromised and adopted Babylonian ways and gods for themselves. So on one hand, you had rebels, and on the other hand, you had those who just kind of gave in and assimilated into the culture. They became Babylonians themselves, kind of. They worship Babylonian gods. They, like Babylonians had a huge army. Yeah, it's a Babylonian empire. So Nebuchadnezzar had a pretty strong army there, and he flattened Jerusalem. He did it in 3 waves. But so Jeremiah kind of gave them a third alternative, and this is how he instructed them to live. He said basically that so Jeremiah gave them the message to live a third way, one that was true to God. You got to remain true to God while also seeking the well-being of Babylon. So he's saying, when you go over there, you're not going to try to topple Babylon. Work for the good of Babylon, because its prosperity is going to be your prosperity too. So they were to settle in, build houses, grow gardens, have children, be fruitful, and multiply. It's like you're back in Eden again, but you're in Babylon. So the message that Jeremiah gave them was kind of like the same directive that God gave Adam and Eve, to be fruitful and multiply, but you're going to do it while you're in exile. That becomes a picture for us, okay? So this is the way Daniel and his friends lived. The first part of the book in Daniel is an exploration of what this looks like. What is it like to live as if you're a member of Eden or a member of Jerusalem, living in exile in Babylon? So the Bible Project would say, their quote is, the way of exile is a combination of loyalty and also subversion. You want another cup of coffee?
What's it? It's not you, Mark. It's me.
I know. So the interspersion of God's people, which is Jerusalem. So if you think about it, it's like God's people or Jerusalem in the middle of a fallen world, which is Babylon. And this is a picture that has actually been there from the first pages of the Bible. So when you're reading in Genesis 2, starting in verse 10, it says, a river flowed out of Eden, okay, to water the garden, and there it divided and became 4 rivers. Now, these rivers are not going to be anywhere near each other, okay? So the name of the first one is the Pishon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. This is the beautiful land. You know what the beautiful land is, right? So remember in Daniel. No, well, the beautiful land is Eden, but remember in Daniel, he kept on calling, what did he keep on calling the beautiful land?
Jerusalem?
Yeah. So it's like there's that connection between Jerusalem and Eden, So You have a river you have a water source that's going to water the beautiful land, and the gold of that land is good, bdellium and onyx stone. It's a place flowing with milk and honey, right? So to speak. The name of the second river is the Gihon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Cush, which is a nickname for Egypt. So wait a minute. Now you're talking about like a part of like Israel's captivity, right? The land of Israel's captivity. Look at the last two. And the name of the third river is the Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. So it's the Tigris in Assyria. That's land of captivity. And the fourth river is the Euphrates, Babylon. So you have this picture ready from the first part of the Bible where like it's saying, you know, like the goodness of Eden is going to go to the places of is going to go not just to the beautiful land, but to the places of exile. Assyria, Babylon, Egypt. Yeah. And this is the imagery that Christ uses when he says, out of you shall come rivers of living water. He's using the imagery of Eden already there. And and for some people who would have put this together, they're like, God is the presence of God and the goodness of Eden is going to reach into a dying world. It's bringing living Jesus to a dying world. It's exactly you know, like what it is. So let me share this now, and we'll talk about this. Here's the oh, Chris, have you seen this?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So actually there's a three-way. I'll zoom in on this. I'll zoom in parts of this, but we'll get like a bit of the big picture. It's kind of cool to review this, but there's actually 4 ways that this is yeah, it's not just a chiasm. The middle part is a chiasm, but first of all, the first 6 chapters are stories about what happens to Daniel and his friends. The last 6 chapters are about the visions. Okay, so it's divided that way. Okay, it's also divided in that chapter 1 and then chapter 8 through 12 are in Hebrew, right? This is Hebrew, but the center part is in Aramaic.
What do you think that's about?
I think what it is that the center part is like Aramaic is a message about the Gentiles, whereas the Hebrew sections is more of a message of God's people. And it's intertwined, but there's like an emphasis. These right here, I think wants to be kind of like an emphasis on things that pertain to all of humanity. And then there's something about the Hebrew parts that have a quality about them where it's really focusing in on the people of God, right?
Which numbers are in American?
Chapters 2 through 7. So this center section, right? The center section is the chiasm, and it's got the center of that chiasm is these 2 stories where Nebuchadnezzar has his pride and is told that he has to he should you know, like recognize God as the sovereign God. And he actually God has mercy on him, and he actually comes to recognize that God is you know, sovereign over all. But his son or his grandson ends up not doing that because of his pride. He's brought down, and so those 2 stories are connected. The stories right before you know, in chapters 3 and 6 are about trials. You know, like you got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into the fiery pit, and on the other side of that, you've got the lion's den where Daniel is tested, and God rescues them both. You know, rescues them all from those situations. In chapters 2 and 7, you have Nebuchadnezzar has a dream about this statue and that statue represents 4 kingdoms. But in Daniel's dream, he sees the same kingdoms, but not not in a way that Nebuchadnezzar saw them. He sees them as beasts. So Nebuchadnezzar sees them as mighty kingdoms and a gold statue and a tribute to man, whereas Daniel has a dream about those 4 kingdoms, and there are these horrific beasts. So those are parallel. Now, in order to understand the last chapters, the rest of the visions, you have to understand chapters 2 and 7. So 2 and 7 point to chapters 8, 9, 10 through 12. So the way that this is kind of diagrammed here kind of shows you that, like, if you want to understand the visions, understand chapters 2 and 7. So those kind of like, so there's kind of like these substructures, and then there's an other structure here where you have you don't just have chapters 3 and 6 with the testing of Daniel and his friends' faithfulness. That starts in chapter 1. So chapter 1 kind of belongs in a structure along with because this is where, are they going to eat the foods that were offered to idols, or are they going to stay true to their God? So chapters 1, 3, and 6 all kind of belong together in that structure. So if you look at like the time that this happens, Babylon's first attack on Jerusalem, like I said, there are 3 waves of attacks. Daniel's part of that exile, and because he's part of aristocracy, he is put into service in Babylon. He's recruited in Babylon, and then they get their pressure to give up their Jewish identity. Faithfulness to the Torah leads to exaltation. So the story here is like, if you want to be exalted by God, and He'll lift you up. It wasn't going to be that you're going to exalt yourself in Babylon, but God has the ability to exalt you within Babylon if you stay true to Him. So I think that there's a long-term message in here, because one of the things that, like, we've noticed from chapter 11 is that there are those who were faithful, like in the Maccabees, right? But they were faithful to death. So that's one of those reflections of Hebrews 11, right? People did all these great exploits through faith, but they also died for their faith. So, but the long-term thing that all of the faithful have looked to is that one of these days, God is going to judge the world and make things right. So in the end, God will deliver you. You may die, you may suffer, you may do all those things, but God will exalt you and He will deliver you. It may not be until the final judgment, but that is going to happen. So on one hand, Daniel is a picture of God doing those things, but the prophecies that you have later on in the book, they end up with those same kind of victories, but you also see a lot of suffering. So just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said that, you can throw us into the fire and God will deliver us. But even if He doesn't, we're not going to do this. So they're leaving in the possibility that maybe they will get burned up. So it's kind of like the faithfulness, and faith looks it is a risk, and they were like, but even with that, we're still not going to do this, because we would sooner die for our faith than bow to something that you made. Yeah. So when you get to chapter 4, you have this story about Nebuchadnezzar losing his mind and him becoming like a beast. This is a sub theme that goes all the way again to the first books in the Bible, and that is that humans, they're the royal image of God. Hey, John, if you could mute yourself. So humans are the royal
really.
image of God.
Just
God to
taking it
rule.
one day at a time. Mute yourself. Mute yourself. Hang on.
Okay, wait, hold on. Let's see if I can. There we go. Magic. So anyway, from Genesis 1 and 2 and Psalm 8, humans are the royal image of God to rule on God's behalf. But when humans rebel and make themselves God, they become less than human in a sense. They become like the beast that they were supposed to rule. That's and that goes all the way. We can trace that to the first image that Daniel's presented with, and that is that they have these beasts kind of ruling the earth, and these kingdoms have become beast-like and not fully human. So Daniel 2's vision, of course, is the Greek Empire and the Medo-Persian Empire, and how something was going to happen. There's an evil king in the Greek Empire that attacks Jerusalem. He exalts himself above God, and he's destroyed by God. And then you have this Daniel's prayer, which is he says, "Oh Lord, how long, Lord?" And because he knows from Jeremiah 25 that Israel's exile will last 70 years. But he's told by the messenger, Israel's sin has continued, and so will exile. Exile and oppression will last 7 times longer. So 490 years. And then finally, in the last vision, which is the last 3 chapters, are actually they kind of all belong together. 9, 10, and 10 through 12 belong together. It's kind of one thing. You have this whole succession of Persia, Greece, and we went through all of that. You have the king of the north, and you have like Daniel sees all of this happening, but then he finds out that it also has something tied to the final days, the last days. So here, even the Bible Project goes, what does this all refer to? So first point of view is that exploits of the Syrian king of Antiochus in the 160s BC. Some people believe all of these refer to Antiochus Epiphanes. It doesn't really make sense to me, because I believe this one has to do with the Roman Empire, and so do these two. This one, they end in the Roman Empire. So the second point of view is that it's all about the Roman Empire's destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Some of them attach all of those, and that doesn't make sense to me either. And then another point of view is that all of these events have yet to happen when Jesus returns, because the problem is that, like, whatever you look at, like whatever point of view you look at, in a sense they're all right, because you can't there are parts of each one of those points of view where you can't make sense of it if you take that point of view. This is why there's so much like argumentation and discussion about Daniel.
Then it seems like if one point of would be ruined for each point of view, then there shouldn't be that much argument about it.
In a way, yeah,
There's
but
something-
people like try to draw graphs and do all kinds of fancy math to try to like get, and then kind of rewrite history or bend the meaning of things, and something is uncanny about it where you're going, you know what, it is about that, but it's also not about that. And so I think I've taken an approach that's kind of like, well, it's already, but not yet. That's kind of like the best that I can do. But I kind of like what Tim Mackie says here. In a sense, they're all right. That the book offers hope to all future generations. Everybody can benefit from this. And you're going to see reiterations of Babylon occur in your lifetime. And we're seeing that right now. Jesus used Daniel to describe Jerusalem's leaders. There was something that happened where Jesus in this prophecy right over here. What was it? Yeah, the 70 years. When Jesus comes on this, when Jesus is about to be crucified, he says, from now on, you are going to see, well, where's the Son of Man? No, Son of Man is, Son of Man's here. Sorry. You're going to see the Son of Man lifted, and set next to the Ancient of Days, or the next to the Father, right? Well, here he has a dream, and he's seeing all these beasts coming out of the, out of the sea, and they're trampling on God's people, and they are almost like, the Son of Man is sort of like is attached to them. In other words, remember that, like by the end of that prophecy, it says the Son of Man was lifted up and they will rule. It's kind of like, wait, is it one person or is it a bunch of people? It's like that language gets kind of like mixed in together, where you can't really tell sometimes if it's talking about one person or a bunch of people. Well, Jesus is the one person. He is the Son of Man, but who he identifies with are the people that are being trampled by the beast. And what he tells the Sanhedrin is this, that you're going to see this from now on. And guess what? You're part of this. Okay. So he's like, you're basically this beast that is trampling on the Son of Man and on the people that are being trampled by the beast. So yeah, no, they don't want to hear that. So Jesus used Daniel to describe Jerusalem's leaders in that way. And yeah, they didn't want to hear it. So John, the author of Revelation, he adapts Daniel to describe Rome and all future empires. So in John's day, he's seeing Babylon all over again. And if you take a Revelation to be indicative of something in the future, then and at the end, then there's something definitely going to happen to Babylon there at the end. But that's kind of like, do you want to see their video about this? Did I ever show that to you? The video of
I like their stuff.
yeah, have you seen it? The one on Daniel?
I don't know.
Actually, let's because I think they describe, they okay, yeah, let me get that on here, and then we'll just watch. It's like a 7-minute video, and then and that's kind of like the last thing that we'll do. Wait,
Why did Roscoe sing about Babylon?
why is what?
Roscoe probably.
Are you thinking of like the song, by the rivers of Babylon? Yeah, they believe a lot of. I think maybe it's also has to do with there's something about exile in Babylon that that people with a history of slavery really Egypt and Babylon, those are like stories that resonate with people groups who have identified closely to that thing, naturally. So let me see.
That's why I thought exile is easiest way. Yeah. Get out. And then Exodus is let's go. Yeah. You're in a movement.
That's an escape. So that's kind of like that case. It was good, The Exodus was good, but exile was not so good. Bible Project Daniel. Okay, so
yeah, the Israelis.
Here, this is about to start, I think.
Yeah. Crazy. Like every single like this said that. And where we going?
Okay. Let me see. Am I getting audio?
Yeah, you showed this.
Okay, we'll switch it.
Yeah.
came the way of Israelites from the exile. Among them were 4 men, David, Daniel, who's later named Belton, and his 3 friends, who you probably know, the Babylonians, Shadrach, and Meshach. This book tells of their struggles between hope and unbelief. The book's design seems pretty simple. Chapters 1 through 6 contain stories about Daniel, Babylon, while chapters 7 through 12 contain the vision of Daniel. But this 2-part shape is made even more interesting by another time. That's the book's beginning. It begins in Hebrew language, but chapters 2 through 7 are written in Hebrew language. But then in chapters 8 through 12, it goes back. This design shows how chapters 2 through 7 are coherent, but it also highlights the importance of chapters 2 and 7 in the canon of. Let's just dive in. Chapter 1 introduces the basic tension of the path. Daniel and his friends are really wise and capable, and they're recruited to serve in the royal palace of Babylon. But they're pressured to give up their Jewish identity, living and being like that, violating the Jewish laws of Torah. So they refuse, and they choose faithfulness to Torah, and it puts them in danger. But God delivers them, and they end up being eligible. After this begins Aramaic section, which you'll see has a few tools. So first they came to Babylon. That, it turns out, only Daniel perfect without a huge stance to make a 4 type. It symbolizes a secret kingdom. The head is Babylon. But then a huge rock line shattered the steps. Now this dream is the first of many symbolic visions. And this one introduces the storyline of them all. Daniel says that the statue represents a train of Babylon, all filled out of violence. But one day, God's kingdom will come to confront and humble the arrogant kingdoms of this world, fill the world. After this, chapter 3 tells the famous story of Daniel and his friends who refused to bow down and worship the Jewish idol statue, which, like the statue in chapter 2, represents the king and his imperial. So the friends are persecuted, they're thrown into a fiery furnace, but God delivers them from death, and they're exalted by the king, who now acknowledges their God. After this come a pair of stories about 2 Babylonian fathers, and then his son, Belton. They're both filled with pride because of their imperial power. And so, like in chapter, God warns them both into vision, which also like that, only Daniel. He says that both kings are coming to God, both kings arrogantly. So Nebuchadnezzar is stricken with peace. Then he humbles himself. His humanity turns to him to be restored. This is in contrast with his son, Belshazzar, who doesn't. God is assassinated. Now, these 2 stories draw this imagery in Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 10, where humans are depicted as the royal imagery. He's given them authority to rule over the beasts, the field, the birds of the air on behalf of God, who is the ruler of the people. But when human kingdoms get that, they rebel, make themselves and their power into the God, they become like violent beasts who will face God. Which brings us to chapter 6, the pair of chapters. This time it's Daniel, because he refuses to pray and worship. So, like the friends, he's sentenced to death, thrown into the water. But God delivers him from the beast, and like the friends,
Yeah, God delivers him from the beast. I forgot the, yeah, but it's that beast theme. God delivers him from the beast.
he exalts him. Which brings us to the pair of chapters, center of the book, where all its yes, it's another dream, Daniel. And ironically, you can't understand the dream until angelic messenger. You see the series of 4 beasts, one like a lion, then like a bear, and one like a big leopard. Each of these symbolizing the character. And last of all is a super beast, identified as really evil. It has lots of horns, a common symbol for kingdom. And there's one specific king, who is an image of an arrogant king who exalts himself above God and and they are symbolized by a figure called man, who's an image for both God's covenant, but also for their king. But then all of a sudden, God, who calls it into, comes and sets up. He destroys the super, exalts the Son of Man on the cloud, where he comes up to sit at God's right hand, there and God. We can look back now and see how all of these stories in the first happened. The three stories of faith, they're meant to offer hope to God's suffering people. But they suffered because human kingdoms have rebelled against God and become weak. And so these visions encourage patience. That God's people are to wait to bring his kingdom and rule over our world. But it raises the question about when God is going to do that, and that's what these final three visions. It came from another vision about the final two beings of 7. But this time they're symbolized by ram, who told us.
See, this is where I disagree with him. I don't believe it's the last two beasts of chapter 7. I think it's the two middle ones. So that part doesn't make any sense to me. So the last part in chapter 7 would be the Roman Empire. So it brings you to the Roman Empire. But like the in chapter 8, it's about the Medo-Persian and Greek Empire. Doesn't go into the Roman Empire. So that brings you to Antiochus Epiphanes. So that's where I disagree with Tim Mackey on this.
And then by the goat, how does the goat come a whole bunch of horns? One of it symbolizes the.
So he thinks that, or some people think that, like when you get to this big beast here, that you're still in that you're still in the Greek Empire. Yeah, I think it's Roman Empire.
We're told more about it, that people attack Jerusalem, exalt themselves above God, and defile the temple of fire. However, in the end, he will be destroyed by God. Now, by chapter 9, Daniel is very confident, especially as when all of this. So he consults the scroll of the prophet. God said that Israel's exile would only last 70 years. But for Daniel, the 70 years is almost up. So he asked God to fulfill his promise. But an angel informs him that Israel's sin and rebellion, and so their time of exile and oppression will continue on 7 times longer than their empire. Daniel is deeply disturbed by this. We're shown the same sequence of Persia, Greece, and Alexander the Great, followed by lesser kings, all leading up to this final king of the world, who will invade Jerusalem, set up idols, and exalt God. But then, all of a sudden, now there's been endless debate about what all of these visions refer to. Many see a clear connection to exploit of the Syrian king Antiochus in 160 BC. He killed many faithful Jews of idols. Others think it points forward to the Roman Empire, Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem temple. And still others think it will be fulfilled. Future events have yet to happen in Jesus. So the problem is that the symbols, numbers, they don't quite match any of these. But it opens up the concept that in a sense, they are all. Because Daniel has been signed. So all future generations of God. It did so in the days of Antiochus. This is why Jesus could use imagery from Daniel to describe and confront the oppressive leaders he confronted in Jerusalem. This is why John, the visionary, who wrote the Revelation, could adapt Daniel's vision and apply it also all future. And so the point is that all generations of leaders can find here a pattern. The pattern that human beings and their kingdoms become violent when they glorify their own power, when they redefine right and wrong, don't acknowledge God. But Daniel also holds out that one day God will confront the thief. He will rescue his world and his people, bringing his kingdom to all. And so for every generation, this book speaks a message of hope. It's good and good. That is the book of Daniel.
Sorry, guys, I gotta
Yeah.
go.
That's okay. Hey, good.
All right,
Yeah,
brothers.
thanks for showing up, Joseph.
All right, thanks for your hard work, man.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Josiah lived in the northern
I
part of
do this
Israel,
every time.
He sometimes calls Ephraim or Jacob. About 200 years after
You hang in there. We'll talk to you later.
Okay.
All right.
So anyway, let me stop the recording now.